Okay, I'm honored to serve as a moderator for this session, where we will bring together diverse perspectives to foster meaningful conversations on AI ethics and regulation. First of all, I would like to introduce our brilliant keynote, Ander Errasti.
Ok. Bona tarda a totes i a tots. Moltes gràcies per estar aquí a la Universitat de Barcelona. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here at my alma mater at University of Barcelona in this great conference. I have to say, in case some of you are still on time to run, I'm a political philosopher, so my lecture will have probably dense theoretical content, although I have tried to make it as comprehensible as possible, both in terms of understanding and also in terms of trying to cover the main elements of debate that current trends on political and moral philosophy have regarding the challenges that AI provides for our democracies. And actually, the lecture it's titled A Defense of Public Morality as a Mean for Technological Innovation. Because at the end of the day, one key aspect of this international conference, as well as most public debates worldwide, is a balance between regulation and innovation. This is a philosophical issue with enormous practical consequences. More importantly, it is a question with no unequivocal answer. There is no perfect answer to the question on which is the balance that we need to foster between innovation trends and regulation. It is clear, since the earliest stages of human history, of humans living together, of humans organizing politically, socially, and economically together, that the more possibilities to flourish that individuals have, the more sophisticated and complex becomes our common coexistence. That's a key fostering factor of cultural evolution in an understanding of culture, which is not the usual one, where technology is an intrinsic part of it. It's not that culture has its own path of evolution and technology, it's an external element. No, technology since the very first stages of human development has been part of our culture. Innovation and subsequent technological development in this sense are not at all random. They are part of cultural, social, and political developments of societies. This development requires a constant review of the way we live together, and that's where regulation appears, at least since modernity. Little wonder humans, and thus innovation, need freedom as much as we need living together. Innovation leading to a technological development insofar as we are rational agents with the capacity for creativity and entrepreneurship is unavoidable. We cannot dissociate the innovative condition from the human condition. So the challenge is how we do it, not whether we do it or not. Some will say this is because of intrinsic reasons. There is no way of avoiding it. It is part of our human nature. Some others say that it's due to instrumental, functional, or material factors. We have plenty of examples around history where a famine has generated a social need that has resulted in a technological innovation. The need of improving our commercial means was a key element to foster innovation regarding transport. So we, of course, find explanatory reasons on material, functional, or instrumental elements. But even if that won't be our approach, even if some others might say, no, it is a matter of deontological and utilitarian moral reasons that we need to provide technological solutions. It doesn't matter. Regardless of the underlying explanation, the truth is that technological development has been contemporary to every human development in an ambivalent, dynamic, and unstoppable pattern. And nothing seems to indicate that this might stop while humans keep existing. History is full, actually, of great technological inputs that came together with great cultural progress. Same way as it is also full of examples of devastating technological inputs with disastrous political, social, and economic consequences that flash forward humanity for years, decades, or even centuries. That's why it is so important, crucial, I would say, first of all, to have this kind of forum. Having the possibility of discussing these matters in a university, in an academic setting, despite not all of you being academics, or precisely because of that, is a civic duty. And if we follow what we have learned since modernity about organizing the way we live together, having some civility is a key factor in granting cultural progress, including, of course, technological progress. If one looks back to the early colonizers of the American continent, and it sees the challenges they had to live together with so many different worldviews that each of the citizens or new citizens bring back from their homes, we see that if there wouldn't have been some sort of shared understanding of what civility means, the progress that, in that case, the United States had over the last 300 years wouldn't have been possible. That's exactly the case when we talk about technological development as a key element of cultural progress. And that's where ethical and subsequent political discussion becomes a fundamental matter of debate, not as a complementary issue of this debate on technology, not as an uncomfortable reminder of our moral consciousness, but as an essential matter. Because one thing is the politicized debate on morality, and I think that all of us are seeing nowadays how moral debates are permeating, are appearing all around the public politicized and partisan debate. That's one thing. But the underlying moral grounds that each society has are unescapable. Living together requires adopting once and again the moral principles and ethical codes that allow us to progress together as human beings. A decent society, to echo the political philosopher John Rawls, a society of free and equal individuals who build a fairer present to reach a better future, must publicly debate and establish a moral basis for its cultural development. We may call it a social pact, we may call it a social contract, a constitutional consensus, a bill of rights, but the truth is that regardless of how we call it, we need such a basic framework for a common coexistence, regardless of how dynamic and changing it might be. In the same way as technology is not a separate matter of human culture, neither is morality. Even in the most depicable way, in moral terms, of organizing the way we live together, as unfortunately we have seen since humans live together, there is an ethical dimension in every human relationship and in every political system that organizes these human relationships. Even in the National Socialist regime, there was an underlying moral ground. And actually, in that case, it was pretty clear. There were strong philosophers, of course, I'm not lucky of my profession in that case, that were crucial to establish the political system that led and made functional the National Socialist regime. So in the worst political system that any of us can imagine, all through history, there has been a moral ground. So nothing seems to think that these debates that we are having here are or might be an exception. And in a democracy, actually, we have the required instruments to ensure that we can reflect this minimum morality in our social interactions in a way that ensures cultural progress. That's what we call public morality, which necessarily fosters and delimits the way we regulate society. That's how we know the right thing to do in a way that reflects how we coexist and are free and equal citizens. Of course, there are gray areas, essentially controversial issues, and even disputed views. But even though we still can affirm that there is such a thing, regardless of how minimum might be, of the right thing to do. No one will consider in the current societies, regardless of which area of the world we are in, that using a child as a mean to achieve a goal, it's something morally acceptable. That's something that every society has interiorized and has established as a basic principle. All the political systems that are operating in those diverse societies share this minimum common moral ground. In the case of digital technologies, considering their intrinsic global nature, it is fundamental that we establish this basic moral ground in order to know what's the right thing to do in a digitalized world. Since modernity, liberal democracies and nation states, and do not forget that nation states are a pretty recent phenomena, have institutions, formal and informal social rules, legal structures, all sorts of political and non-political organizations, civil societies, and I say it in plural consciously, and other elements of a democratic political system that have allowed granting cultural progress, including, of course, technological progress. It's not a matter of lack or randomness that the more fast or the fastest technological progress has gone together with the deepening of our democratic systems. Moral debate and dynamic and evolving moral grounds underlying regulations have been constant throughout that process. The answer to what's the right thing to do has constantly changed. But still, there has always been an answer. Nowadays, though, the challenge is definitory. While other track-changing cultural events in human history, especially since modernity, have implied the radical reviewing of our moral patterns in different aspects of human living together, the hyper-digitalized globalization presents at least two unprecedented elements and subsequent challenges in terms of defining a public morality in a democratic society. First of all, the speed of cultural progress, including technological progress, has become increasingly faster. Thus, it is becoming increasingly harder to adapt the institutions to ensure that the minimum set of moral ground we have to ensure coexistence can provide the required outputs and outcomes. This can provide patterns of coexistence that grant free and equal citizens living in a fair society. Second, because the complexity of the cultural progress, especially regarding its technological dimension, is so high that we can hardly adapt to the resulting realms. How do we regulate, how do we establish the moral ground for such a quotidian matter as the personal selection processes, when the way personal selection processes in a digitalized world are evolving in such a velocity that the regulator has no idea of what has to regulate. Only technological developers are capable of understanding the details of the particular issues they develop, and the cross connections, interdependencies, and densities within the system induced by the cultural change are so high that it becomes hard to adapt, at least if we don't change anything. Finishing, still it's hardly arguable, at least if we believe in democracy as the best way of organizing the way we live together, and this is a personal standpoint, there are strong moral, political, instrumental, and historical reasons to do so. We need some way of organizing that is coherent with some set of ethical principles, of a common understanding of what's the right thing to do. If cultural change happens in such a way that there is no way of matching both elements, cultural change and a common moral ground, sooner or later, cultural progress will collapse. Not necessarily in an apocalyptic way, but definitely in a suboptimal way, in any dimension and from any reasonable perspective. The recent precedent of the 2008 world financial and economic crisis is the clearest example of both features: the fast evolution of global capitalism and markets and the complexities within the international monetary and financial markets made it almost impossible to adapt, especially regarding regulatory frameworks. The change of globalization that led to the outcome of a global economic crisis took around 3 decades. The cultural progress leading to a hyper-digitalized society is exponentially advancing in less than a decade, however unequal this progress might be around the world. We certainly know, if we look at human history, that this adaptation must include some ethical and moral dimension. Answering these key challenges from philosophical, anthropological, sociological, economical, and so many other disciplines is a crucial challenge of our time. Unlike our predecessors, time is rushing, but we also have far more tools to engage in the endeavor. Today, we have the pleasure of joining our following panelists to debate some areas of digital development, particularly those gray areas regarding key fundamental issues such as privacy, the right to control over personal information, discrimination and fairness, or arbitrary control and power abuse, but also about how digital societies can improve in the way of engaging in public moral debates. Because when we talk about digital technologies and hyper-digitalized societies and morality, we do not only need to focus on the risks, the threats, the ethical challenges that these technologies imply, but also in the opportunities. I'm pretty sure that we will have the opportunity to do it now. Thank you very much, and the questions are welcome after.
Thank you so much. I will make a small briefing. Ander Errasti is the Chief of Staff of the Rector at the University of Barcelona. He's focusing on strategic governance and institutional ethics. On the rest of the panel, we have Marcus Packard, who is an advisor and investment operator for Method of Bitcoin and Chain for Economy, and also founder of the Pro-Socialize Foundation. Among his many roles, he also serves as vice president of the Rotary Club, and he is the president of the First Food Cup of Catalonia, Olbrot co-founded Copiosis and the local Let's currency, Charchaeco. Yeah. Virtually, we are honored to have remotely Christian Bartholin. Christian Bartholin is a Danish legal expert and deputy head of the Council of Europe Center, Europe's Counterterrorism Division. He also serves as a secretary of the Council's Committee on Artificial Intelligence. Thank you so much, Christian. Can you please confirm if the sound is okay?
I think it's absolutely okay. Thank you very much.
Perfectly. To start, I brought a little bit of reflection because our panel is AI ethics and regulation. Are we developing and implementing AI in a fair, safe, and responsible way? And this brought to my brain something that we need to put on the table. The downing age of artificial humanity, because in fact, it is becoming for us a day-to-day thing that we're implementing, that we're using, that children are using, that young people are using, elderly. We're starting to be involved into something new with amazing possibilities. yet a lot of challenges. As we stand on the brink of this new era, our collective wisdom, foresight, and action will determine whether the age of artificial humanity will be one of harmonious coexistence by solving the biggest challenges of humanity, such as climate change, food security, geopolitical disruptions, or mutual growth, or unfortunately, it could be also a sense of discord and detrimental consequences, and preventing humans to use this technology from being the new atomic bomb. Then, as we're talking on the ethical part of it, I wanted to have these things into account, because sometimes we're only speaking about how do we early adapt to these technologies, but there are bigger risks and there are huge things that we need to discuss. So I'm super happy. Thanks a lot to Democracy for All for bringing us into these conversations, which I think that will drive a better future for all. Then my first question, and of course, you can interrupt me whenever you want. We'll go to Christian. Let's think about the biggest risk. I think that possibility of lethal autonomous weapons is one of the biggest risks. And I would like to understand, I would like to ask you, like, what is your perspective on the development of this and their impact on global security, What ethical is behind this? And what's your opinion to help humanity for the future to avoid these possibilities occur?
Thank you very much. It's a huge question, and I must say right away that my organization, the Council of Europe, is not responsible for regulating laws, the lethal autonomous weapon systems. This is something that is a process that's ongoing in Geneva under the United Nations. But I can, of course, give my 50 cents of ideas on this. Essentially, I believe that it was mentioned by the keynote speaker how much technologies have over time impacted on our societies. Sadly, it also looks like the technology impacts are mainly driven by our desire to acquire weapons that are more destructive than our enemies. Or at least we think they will, and usually they then start catching up with us, and then we are into a good old arms race. And I think it has been like that since someone wanted to have a bronze axe instead of a stone axe, and now, of course, it's we're talking about lethal autonomous weapon systems. They raise a number, I think, of ethical issues that need to be addressed. The up until now, historically, if you like, you have had, of course, always killing on the battlefield, but the killing was something that was relatively personal. It was in the old days something that was really up close and personal, and it has increasingly become maybe a little bit more remote. You can kill at a long distance, but if now you use a lethal autonomous weapon systems, you don't even need to involve a human in the killing process. You can leave it to an algorithm to take decisions about lives and death. Now, I would say that the international humanitarian law, so the protection of civilians in situations of war, as so the Geneva law, but also the Hague law on part of that law, which deals with the issues of how warring parties are supposed to conduct themselves there and what kind of weapons are allowed. I mean, there's nothing new in that we would take the latest technology and try to utilize it. But I also think that sooner or later you will find a way of regulating that. It has been the case from we started after the First World War with banning the use of poisonous gases in warfare. And then we have moved on now. We have not banished but nuclear weapons, but we have made them difficult to get. and we're trying to constantly finding solutions to how we can keep a cap on them, the overall number of them. But in a certain manner, I would say that maybe this risk of destruction that the nuclear bombs have shown have also in a way been helping to preserve us from having major conflicts since 1945, really like World War III. We have had a lot of conflicts, but we have not had something that was quite the order of the one from 1939 to 1945. So this might be it is also a question of psychology. It's a question how we behave with each other, how we use these weapon systems. No doubt that perhaps also the introduction of laws can in a certain way make the killing less. I don't know. It's to be seen. But in any case, it requires that there is a legal basis for this in international law for the use of these weapons and what kind of weapons can be developed. As I said, it's not something my organization is involved in, but I would say as a lawyer in general, yes, this is an area of huge interest for us and we as humanity, and we should make sure that our politicians engage in this process and try to find solutions with the legal experts, with the military experts on how to limit the horrors that can come out of such systems.
Thank you so much. I know we started hard, but the idea is to create a debate. And of course, you're also welcome to participate if you have any kind of question. I will.
Yeah, I pretty much like your question because it somehow echoes a huge moral debate, which is whether there are technologies that have intrinsic moral features that make them bad by themselves, or whether the moral dimension of technology is under use. In the case of automated lethal weapons, it seems the intuition seems to move towards the idea of it might be hard to argue that it's not that it's bad in itself. I mean, it's hardly conceivable the use that from a moral perspective might be adequate of this sort of technologies. But then you realize that we are already using technologies with the same consequences. So maybe the question is not that easy. But I just wanted to point out this element that the moral debate on whether something is wrong or not from a moral perspective, usually it's depending on whether you consider that you have to look for something bad on itself or on the use that we give to that technology.
Thank you so much for adding your comment.
Yeah, so I find that question very interesting as well. I think it's a good place also to point out that what you were saying earlier, that it is fundamental for us to establish a shared framework of what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. And because all of what we will do with artificial intelligence will be a reflection, and it will be also fully dependent on what human beings want to do. And I believe that we have to realize that we're entering an era, we've reached a point in humanity where what used to be childlike dreams are now absolutely crucial for survival, in that we have to establish a shared framework amongst all people in the world. And luckily there's a way for us to do that, which is through the understanding of human needs. Human needs are, it's a scientific definition, and therefore it's an objective framework that we can all work towards to determine and to understand what it is that makes humanity thrive. So I think it's an important point, because a lot of the framework that you were discussing earlier, Christian, which it's great to have you in this conversation. You were talking about human rights. So all the framework that we've been talking about is human rights. Now, the challenge with that is that human rights is a philosophical issue. And so, like Yuval Harari said, you open a human up and you don't find human rights. And so this is what is causing this difficulty of all getting together on the same page. But if we establish a framework that is based on science, such as human needs, in which we define human needs as that which, when lacking, develops a pathology in humans, then we can actually have an objective framework with which to all work towards. And I believe that that is not only crucial, as you said, to establish this framework, but I also believe it is the most effective way to improve society and to focus our work in developing these systems.
Amazing. As we're starting with this, I will follow with another question, like ethical questions, of course. I'm trying to open up conversations. So, should AI be trusted to make life or death decisions, such as autonomous vehicles or military drones or any kind of life and death decision? Like, now, my word, first of all, with your moral debate.
Well, that's not a question to answer in 3 minutes, but if I have to highlight 2 elements, I would say that, first of all, when we talk about AI, the sort of intelligence that we can expect from an AI, not exactly the same as human intelligence, in the sense of those dimensions of human intelligence related to actually imperfection, uncertainty, which due to the intrinsic nature of algorithmic nature of artificial intelligence, it becomes almost impossible to reach unless it's a sort of fake introduction of algorithmical disruptions that tend to show the image of imperfection, uncertainty, and the gray areas of humanity that are actually the gray areas of morality. Considering that, I would say that if the last decision is in the hands of an artificial intelligence, we are most probably losing something on the way that it's valuable. If we use artificial intelligence to gain efficiency in those decisions, but there is still a human in the loop, a human in the process, then I would say that artificial intelligence is definitely, or could be definitely, a fundamental mean also in this sort of critical moral issues.
This is a good example of how the framework of human needs can be useful. So for instance, human needs often, most people don't realize that most of our human needs are emotional, and they are no less biological because they're emotional. And one of our emotional needs is a need for autonomy and participation. And when we understand that as crucial and biological for our development so that we do not develop pathologies that will end up being destructive and will end up leading to blind spots, biases, and destructive behavior, inevitably, because autonomy and participation are fundamental needs, then we understand that it is crucial that we always have the last say, as you said. It's not just a philosophy or moral debate. It's actually, we can base that on science.
Maybe I can say a few words here as well. Actually, the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on Human Rights, on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law, which has just been opened in September for signature and has been negotiated between a large number of countries internationally, not only in Europe, but including, for instance, also United States. The basic principle is that of human dignity and individual autonomy. And it says that each party shall adopt or maintain measures to respect human dignity and individual autonomy in relation to activities within the life cycle of artificial intelligence systems. Now, of course, you can always argue that that human rights are an abstraction, etc. For me, they are pretty much not very abstract. They are very much part of the legal system that we have built since the Second World War, and that is still perhaps, and they are rooted in also in the ideas of enlightenment, and that also brought forward the scientific revolution that we witnessed later on in the 19th century and 20th century. But the whole idea is that it is a way of looking at people, not just from an ethical point of view, because of course we have an ethical issues here, and they are very important, ethical, moral issues, but also looking at what rights should you have? What are your obligations? What are your rights as an individual, as a human being? And I think that's where they have the real added value in terms of the human rights. But to come back to your question, no, in my view, exactly because it would run counter to human dignity and individual autonomy, you can never leave the final decision on anything, and especially not on something with regard to death and life issues to an algorithm to take that decision. That would be a complete, in my view, that would be a complete abdication of responsibility at the human level. Artificial intelligence, in many ways, is a misnomer. It has nothing to do with the way intelligence functions in a human being, where we take into account so many other issues than just the idea of what is likely to be the right outcome. We also look into what is the desired outcome in terms of exactly the ethical and moral issues that we are looking at. We are looking into many much broader aspects than just what is from a mathematical point of view the most likely outcome. And I think that is exactly what differentiates human intelligence from that of artificial intelligence. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with artificial intelligence. It's an excellent tool, but we should not rely on it to take really important decisions. We should always reserve those for the human mind.
Thank you so much. Okay, changing the topic, another ethical issue is on minorities, gender. Like, let's talk about like a specific case. For instance, Amazon started like an AI recruitment processes some time ago. It went really bad because at the end of the day, it was disqualifying or having some biases on female candidates. Then raising the hand on fairness of algorithm decisions in hiring and the potential of perpetuating societal gender biases. I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
Yes, so I find that that's another example, a very good example of the biases that can result from the underlying data that it is being used to be trained on, and also of possibly the developers. And so these biases, in the end, in the blockchain, we talk about layer ones and layer twos, but there's a layer zero under it all, which is the social layer. And that really is what we have to address here. We can, like, society is an organism. It's like a living conscious organism, and it's not a machine. And we can try to change mechanical parts in it, but if we don't address the conscious part beneath it, all of those mechanical parts that we're adding to it, such as legislation, will not fully function. We have to really go to the conscious area of society by educating society, educating everybody about human needs, our emotional needs, which our emotional needs are in line with the human rights. They line up perfectly, but the framework is different, and it is based on science. And then so it enables us to study them and understand them more than just debate about them. And in this case, another example is that if the people that are creating this content that is being used to train the AIs, or the developers, etc., if these people do not understand their needs, they are most likely, which is the case because most people do not know their needs, they're most likely not meeting their needs. And so they, because of that, have small levels of pathology that are resulting in these blind spots and these biases, which is what you have given example of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I would completely agree with the intervention, and I will add two elements that are, we always debate whether the bias is in the technology or in the society that the technology is reproducing. I think that this conundrum, this question, it's hardly solvable. But what we can then is try to introduce preventive measures. And in this regard, I think that the need of having transparent codes on the algorithmic codes in this sort of processes, it's a must. The same way as we always need to, before implementing the result of an automatized algorithmic process, we need to check whether actually there are these blind spots, biases before implementing the results.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I think that it's a very good example of where law is necessary. You will have to have prohibition of discrimination, and you'll have to ensure equality in all aspects of life. This is a part of having a modern free society, that you should not be discriminated against because of your gender or your sexuality or your sex or any race, whatever. This is where I think human rights actually come into their right, and where it is important not just to rely on what is ethically or morally an imperative, but also what is simply your right. How can you be protected against it? We can all discuss ethics, we can all discuss the moral issue of these things, and they certainly are there. Law is, when it's best, based on good ethics and good morals. But at the end of the day, you cannot go to court over your morals or ethics not being the same as somebody else's. You will need to have a cause, and that cause would be that your right has been breached. And in this case, as you mentioned, where women were being discriminated against, that's a clear case. Now you can ask yourself, how did it come there? I'm sure it has something to do with the data set that were trained on. I'm also sure that probably there was probably very likely no ill intent to begin with, but the system developed in a way that based on the information that it had developed in a way that turned out not to be lawful and also not to be what we wanted to have ethically. And that's why, as you said, prevention is important, but it's also important to be able to actually stop it and when things happen, and to have clear possibilities to set an example and say, no, this is not what we want to have. In principle, this is something where you would need to have a legal guideline that says you should by design not make your algorithm in such a way that it will do unlawful discrimination.
Thank you so much. Taking into account that artificial intelligence is here, but quantum will arrive soon, and in fact, it will spread faster. Then my call to action, my question to you is about how do you think that we can include diversity and inclusion for those countries that are far away from technology? Because of course, we're talking about something that is not accessible to everyone. Then how can we integrate, and what is the moral debate and ethical there if we're somehow some countries that have more access to these type of technologies and of course are leading this conversation without, of course, taking into account others that do not have the same access. So that is my ethical debate, and I leave you guys. Who wants to start? Christian.
Thank you very much. This is a very huge one, but I think what you are describing there is what is often referred to in international political discourse as the digital divides. And these are very real. We have states around the world that have access to the technology, developing the technology, and is also exporting the technology to other parts of the world. And then we have a number of societies that are, and states with their societies that are much more on the receiving end, if they have at all access to the technology. I mean, one should not forget that it's actually quite it requires quite a bit of resources to run an AI system. This is not something that you can just do if you do not have a powerful power grid and access to many other access to the internet on a regular basis, etc., etc., etc. All of these things are needed, and you need to also have to make this something that is really useful, you need to have a level of education that will allow people to make to use this for the best, and not just to sit with it and not know what to do with it, or become the victims indeed of others that are using it in a better way. So I think that we certainly need to work on this. The United Nations is, as part of its millennial development goals, is working towards bridging the gap. We try from the other international organizations to support where we can do this. And one of the areas where I see a need for support is not just to have access to the technology, which is an important part, but also to have access to the protection against abuse and misuse through the technology. And this is something that we can only do because, and there I think, to put it very, very directly, that is an ethical and moral duty on us to ensure that we are not leaving some people behind around the world without any protection, but can become victims of a technology that has many good sides, but also comes with a darker side, that it can be used for, surveillance, for control, for suppression. And there we need to be we need to be vigilant as international world.
I may, I actually think that your question goes to a core philosophical debate between the universality and diversity of human rights, or even human needs. Because if we, for instance, look Amartya Sen's work, the Indian economists, on his welfarist approach, you realize that the needs are, of course, scientifically definable in universal terms, but the manifestation of those needs that varies from one cultural context to another, and therefore the answers also need to take into account this diversity. The point here is, how do we match the fact that technologies, or digital technologies in particular, are global technologies, do not know about barriers, about political barriers, geographic barriers, with the fact that the use of those technological devices, or digital technologies, happens in concrete context, in specific realms. I don't have the answer. I just wanted to put the question.
Well, I think that it's similar to the challenge of how do we resolve the problem with people starving, right? So there's a serious problem of inequality in the world today, and I believe that the solution lies in raising awareness about the fact that it's not just a moral duty, which a moral duty is great, but it's actual an economic necessity and a survival necessity for all of us humans to be working together as a team towards the same goal, voluntarily, because freedom is also a human need. And the way to do that is through establishing understanding in everyone that this is not just a voluntary thing that is something that we would prefer, equality and having everyone have access to all these benefits of society, of technology, but it's actually it's necessary for our thriving and our survival as a species.
Okay, I think we're almost arriving to the end, but at the end, I want to share, maybe as citizen, we're talking about democracy, we're talking about moral, ethical debate. What advice would you give to the younger generations, if you could? Like, I don't know, to any of us seated here today discussing this about democracy. I want you to think about one advice, as an expert and leader and visionary working on this, could you give to improve the future of AI ethics and regulation as a person or citizen,
If I start, I won't get offended with the younger generation's reference. We all are younger generations, hope so. No, jokes aside, if I have to give a recommendation to my 4-year-old nephew, I think that it will say to have a conscious use of technology, to not fear technology, but that the best way of avoiding the risks and threats underlying technology, it's actually having a conscious use of them. So to being constantly aware of what are you actually doing when you are using digital technologies, because that's not always crystal clear. That's not always something that is given. And the more digitalized our social, economic, cultural, and political interactions become, the more blind spots will be, or the more automatized uses we will actually be doing. So not losing sight of this consciousness of the use of technology, I think it's the most important point.
Thank you so much. Who wants to continue?
Yeah, I can, so I know I'll sound like a broken record, but this is so crucial. This is so crucial for us to establish a shared framework, that I believe that that is what everybody needs to be focusing on. And people need to focus on understanding how human needs affect their behavior, their own behavior, and the behavior of others, and understanding that and communicating that as well.
My advice would be very simple, and it would be slightly repetitive of what has already been said, but it is: be critical. Don't think that the technology can replace you or your brain. You need to take your own decisions. You need to own your own decisions. And you can use the technology. It's a fantastic tool, but be critical.
Okay, so as you went super fast, we're going to make a crazy 1 minute reply to you all. And it is about, like, I don't know, taking into account the worst science fiction movie disaster that could happen with AI. What would be your your biggest call to action to the politicians, to policymakers? Like, I don't know, what could be on your roadmap and that could be important to analyze nowadays before it occurs? Like, I don't know if I made it clear or something, but
I would say that rather than the topic, and very, very short, the key element for our regulators, our representatives, is to include those developing the technologies in the decision-making process.
Yes, I believe that they should include all of the things that we've been talking about today, and have more seminars about them and workshops so that everybody understands them.
I think the worst thing that can happen, if I may put it like that, is already happening. And that is that this technology, fantastic as it is in many ways, is instead being used for suppressing your political opponents and keeping power within the ranks of a few. That, I think, is the biggest horrible scenario that you were looking for, if you would look at it and from a science fiction thing. Its problem is it's science fact. It's not science fiction. That's the true thing. We need to have these discussions about how we use the technology, and I think that should include everyone, as was also said by the previous speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Another time, Christian, for your time and connection. We'll see you later on next month or in January. And has been an amazing panel. It's recorded, and I think that will be one of the very interesting panels for our library of Democracy for All for the future. Thank you very much.